There is an island at the edge of the world. Not a grand island, not a rich one. No gold beneath its soil, no silver seams running through its hills. Its fields are thin and stony. Its forests are dark and deep and full of things that bite. It sits in the cold grey waters of the Bay of Ice, west of the Wolfswood, south of the land of always winter. The winds off that water do not merely chill, they cut. They have been cutting for 10,000 years. The men and women who live on this island do not build palaces. They do not commission golden cloaks or feast in marble halls. Their castle is a timbered long hall. Their sigil is a black bear rearing upright on a white field, because the bears on Bear Island are real, and the Mormonts have been fighting them since before memory. Their words are, "Here we stand." Not "here we conquer," not "here we rule," not even "here we survive," but just "here we stand." 2 words. Unadorned, immovable, and in the entire long history of Westeros, from the Age of Heroes to the War of the 5 Kings, no words ever proved more literal, because House Mormont stands when other houses fall. They stand when kings abandon them. They stand when their numbers dwindle to almost nothing. They stand when the cost is total ruin. They stand. This is their story. Welcome back to Westeros Explained, the channel where we go deeper than the show, deeper than the recap, all the way down into the bones of George R.R. Martin's world. Book accurate, lore obsessed, always. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We release long-form histories of Westerosi houses, battles and characters that you will not find anywhere else at this depth. And today, we are going to Bear Island. Part 1. The island at the edge of the world origins, the gift of the kings of winter. Bear Island did not always belong to House Mormont. In the deepest ages of Westeros, in that time of myth and half-remembered legend that the Meisters call the Age of Heroes, the island was already inhabited. The first men had settled its rocky shores, cleared patches of its dense pine forest, and scratched a living from the cold earth and colder sea. But Bear Island is remote, a natural fortress of geography. Getting there requires crossing open water. Keeping it requires the constant labor of watchfulness, because the sea brings not only fish, but raiders. For thousands of years, those raiders were the Ironborn. The Ironmen of the Iron Islands have always looked east, across the sea, for plunder. They came to Bear Island repeatedly. They raided its settlements. They carried off its people. There are stretches of the island's history, such as it can be reconstructed from sparse records, where Ironborn lords occupied it entirely, ruling it as a distant conquest of the drowned gods' reapers. This changed during the era of the Kings of Winter, those ancient Stark lords, who carved the north into their domain through warfare and diplomacy over many centuries. The exact circumstances differ depending on which account you consult. The most widely accepted version, preserved in the annals of Winterfell, holds that a king of winter, the name is lost to time, won Bear Island from the Ironborn in a wrestling match.
Yes, a wrestling match.
This is not as strange as it sounds. The Ironborn of that era, like the Northmen, had their own traditions of single combat and wager contests, where mighty men settled disputes of territory and pride by testing their strength against one another. The specifics of what was wagered, who challenged whom, and how the match unfolded are gone, but the result endured for thousands of years afterward. Bear Island became Stark land, and in the way of the North, where great lords granted fiefdoms to loyal vassal families as reward for service, courage, or blood ties, the Starks eventually gave Bear Island to House Mormont. When precisely this happened, we do not know. The Mormonts do not feature prominently in the oldest northern chronicles. They were never a grand house, never counted among the most powerful lords of the kingdom, never held the ear of kings in the way that houses Bolton, Umber, or Karstark did. They were small. They were remote. They were loyal, and on Bear Island, loyalty was armor enough. The island itself, what Bear Island makes its people. To understand House Mormont, you must understand Bear Island. It is not large. You can ride its length in a matter of hours. Its soil is poor, thin over ancient rock, resistant to cultivation, suitable for root vegetables and little else. Its wealth, such as it is, comes from the sea: cod, herring, seals, and the occasional whale driven into its shallows. But what Bear Island lacks in agricultural richness, it compensates for in something far harder to quantify. It builds a certain kind of person. Because on Bear Island, the threat is constant, and it comes from every direction. The bears the island is named for are not decorative. They are large. They are aggressive. They have always competed with the human settlers for the island's resources: fish runs, berry patches, honey, and occasionally people. The children of Bear Island do not grow up with bears as symbols. They grow up with bears as threats. And then there are the Ironborn. Even after the Starks won Bear Island from the drowned men, the Ironborn did not simply stop looking at it. An island is always vulnerable. There is no land border to fortify with a castle and a host of knights. The sea is open, and the sea does not care about treaties. Every generation of Bear Islanders grew up knowing that ships might appear on the horizon, that the men on those ships would carry axes, that no help from the mainland would arrive in time. This produced something remarkable: a culture where the women of Bear Island learned to fight, not as a curiosity, not as a novelty, as necessity. When the men sailed out to fish, to raid in retaliation, or to answer the Stark muster for war, the women were left to defend the settlements, and defend them they did. The women of Bear Island became axe wielders, spear carriers, fighters who trained alongside the men as a matter of survival. This was not a Mormont invention. It was a Bear Island tradition, older than the Mormonts themselves. But it became inseparable from the Mormont identity, because the women of House Mormont, generation after generation, embodied it utterly. Part 2, The Great Mormont Lords, Shadows in the Record's Ancient Lords. What little survives, the maesters of the Citadel have not always been thorough in recording the deeds of minor northern lords. Winterfell kept its own records, of course, but fires, battles, and the indifference of time have taken their toll. What we know of the early Mormonts is fragmentary. We know they fought. We know they answered every Stark muster, generation after generation, sending what warriors Bear Island could spare, which was never many, for the island could not be left undefended. We know they faced Ironborn raids repeatedly, and that they were not conquered again after the Starks gave them the island. That last fact tells us something. It tells us that the Mormonts were competent defenders, and that they inspired in their people the willingness to stand and bleed rather than submit. Their words, "Here we stand," were not chosen casually. They were chosen by people who understood that standing was the only option. Retreat from Bear Island means retreat into the sea. The Mormonts in the Conquest era and thereafter, when Aegon Targaryen descended upon Westeros with his dragons and his sisters, the North did not fight him. Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, made the calculation that no army, not even one bolstered by every bannerman in the kingdom, could withstand dragonfire in open battle. He surrendered his crown, and the North became part of the Seven Kingdoms. House Mormont knelt with their liege lord. This was not cowardice. It was the northern pragmatism that has always been a Stark virtue, and by extension, a virtue of those who served them. You do not throw away your people's lives for a point of pride when the alternative is watching them burn. In the centuries of Targaryen rule that followed, the long Targaryen peace, the dance of the dragons, the reign after reign of dragon lords and their increasingly dragon-sparse descendants, the Mormonts continued to serve as they always had, quietly, loyally, on their island. They were not a house that produced Hand of the Kings. They were not a house whose daughters married into royalty. They were not wealthy enough to play the great game of court intrigue. They were the house that, when war came, showed up. Part 3. Robert's Rebellion. And the Mormonts' answer. When Robert Baratheon raised his rebellion against the Mad King, Aerys Seku Targaryen, when the stag and the wolf and the falcon united against the dragon, the North answered the call. Eddard Stark rode south with his bannermen, and the Mormonts rode with him. Bear Island's contribution to the rebellion was, by the raw numbers, not large. They were never a house that could field thousands, but what they sent was real, and the men and women of Bear Island did not flinch. The rebellion ended at the Trident, where Robert Baratheon crushed Rhaegar Targaryen with a warhammer blow to the chest, scattering the rubies of the prince's breastplate into the red waters of the river. The Mad King died shortly after at the hands of Jaime Lannister. Robert took the Iron Throne. The North returned home. The Mormonts returned to Bear Island, but they brought with them something they would carry for years afterward. The reputation of being the sort of house that is always there when it matters. In the North, that reputation is worth more than gold. Part 4, Lord Jeor Mormont, the old bear, the man who gave up his castle. Among the lords of House Mormont, one name stands taller than all others before the events of the War of the Five Kings. Jeor Mormont, called the Old Bear, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, a man who made a choice that was, by the reckoning of his age, extraordinary, and who paid for it with his life in a way he could not have foreseen. Jeor Mormont was Lord of Bear Island. He ruled it as his father had ruled it, and his father before that. He was a warrior of note, large, strong, and possessed of the Mormont stubbornness that had kept the island independent for centuries. He had a son, Jorah, and Jorah was a problem we will speak of at great length. But before that problem came to a head, Jeor Mormont made his choice. He gave up his lordship. He gave up Bear Island. He passed his title to his son and traveled north, not to retire, not to pray in some sept, but to take the black. He joined the Night's Watch. Why does a ruling lord do this? The reasons are never simple, but in Jeor Mormont's case, the maesters who have studied his life point to the combination of a genuine belief in the Watch's mission and a temperament that could not sit idle. Jeor was a man of action. The Watch needed men of action. Its ranks had been hollowing out for generations as the realm forgot what lived beyond the wall. Jeor Mormont remembered. He did not go north to die in obscurity. He went north to serve, and serve he did, rising through the Watch. His ranks with the methodical competence of a man who had spent a lifetime governing people and commanding them in war. Eventually, the Black Brothers elected him Lord Commander. It is worth pausing on that. The Night's Watch chooses its Lord Commander. Unlike the hereditary lordships of Westeros, the Watch selects based on merit, or at least on the confidence of the assembled Black Brothers. Jeor Mormont earned that confidence. He earned it so thoroughly that when Jon Snow came to the Wall, as a green boy who thought he was better than everyone around him, it was Jeor Mormont who saw through the arrogance to the leader beneath and chose to invest in him. Jeor Mormont's leadership of the Night's Watch. The Night's Watch that Jeor inherited was a shadow of what it had once been. The great fortresses of the Wall, once numbering 19, had dwindled to 3 garrisoned keeps: Castle Black, the Shadow Tower, and Eastwatch by the Sea. The rest stood empty, their towers crumbling, their gates locked against a wind that cared nothing for the kingdoms of men. Recruiters like Yoren combed the dungeons and cells of the realm for men willing to trade execution or imprisonment for a lifetime of black cloaks and cold nights. The volunteers, the younger sons of knights, the idealists who believed in the Watch's ancient purpose, were fewer and fewer. Jeor Mormont ran this diminished institution with the pragmatism and iron will of a man who understood that you work with what you have. He maintained discipline. He sent out ranging parties beyond the Wall to assess the state of the wildling populations, to count the free folk, to watch the movements of those who called themselves the people beyond. He gathered intelligence in the way that experienced military commanders gather intelligence, methodically, patiently, knowing that the information he gathered today might save lives next year. And he gave Jon Snow a sword. This detail, small in the telling, enormous in its symbolism, reveals everything about Jeor Mormont's character. Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade of House Mormont, had been passed down through Jeor's family for generations. It was a priceless weapon and a priceless heirloom. When Jon Snow saved Jeor's life, from a white, one of the corpse soldiers raised by the White Walkers, Jeor gave him Longclaw. This was not a casual gift. This was a man saying, "You are worthy of my house's greatest treasure." A man without sons, estranged from the son he had, reaching across the barriers of blood and name to invest in something he believed in. It was, in its way, the most Mormont thing he could have done. Stubborn, direct, unbothered by what others might say. The great ranging and the death of the old bear. As the War of the Five Kings erupted in the south, as Robb Stark raised his banners and marched to war, as Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, as half the realm burned, Jeor Mormont did something that most of the realm would have called mad. He marched north, the Great Ranging, a mass expedition beyond the wall with hundreds of men of the Night's Watch, the largest ranging in living memory, possibly the largest since the Long Night itself. His purpose was to find what was happening beyond the wall. The wildlings were moving, not raiding in their normal patterns, but moving in mass, fleeing southward in numbers that suggested something terrible was driving them. The ranging parties that went north had been disappearing. The dead were being found, and then not staying dead. Jeor Mormont led his men north to find out why. They found the Fist of the First Men, an ancient ring fort atop a hill in the haunted forest, a remnant of those earliest human settlers who had built watchposts against the darkness. Mormont set camp there. The White Walkers came. In the cold, small hours before dawn, the attack came. Not an army of living men, an army of the dead. Whites. Fallen rangers, fallen wildlings, corpses animated by the cold magic of the others and sent against the living. The Night's Watch scattered. Men died in the darkness. The horn blew 3 times, the signal in the old traditions of the Watch, for an enemy beyond counting. They fled. The survivors retreated to Craster's Keep, the fortified homestead of Craster, a wildling who practiced the darkest of survival bargains, sacrificing his own sons to the others in exchange for being left in peace. It was not a pleasant refuge. It was the only one they had. And it was there that Jeor Mormont met his end. Not from a White Walker, not in heroic battle against the dead. From his own men, a mutiny. Black brothers who had broken under the terror of the Fist, who had lost their faith in the mission, who resented Craster's parsimony with his food, who looked at their Lord Commander and saw not a leader, but the man who had led them into disaster. They rose up. Craster died in the bloodshed, and Jeor Mormont, the old bear, the man who had given up a lordship to serve the realm, was stabbed in the back by the men he commanded. He bled out on the floor of a wildling's keep, north of the wall, far from Bear Island, far from everything he had been born to. His last thoughts, by accounts of those who survived, were of regret, not for the sacrifice he had made, but for not being able to finish what he had started. He died as he had lived, facing forward. Part 5, Jorah Mormont, the Exile, the Night. The Fuliv Jeor Mormont represents the apex of House Mormont's honor, the old northern virtues of duty, sacrifice, and unsentimental courage. Then his son Jorah represents something more complicated, a cautionary tale, a tragedy, a man who was almost great and whose fatal flaw was not weakness or cowardice, but love. Jorah Mormont was, by all accounts, a formidable figure. He was large and strong, the Mormont build, the bear's frame, and he had proven himself in battle during the Greyjoy Rebellion, when Balon Greyjoy rose against Robert Baratheon and attempted to reclaim Iron Island independence. At the Siege of Pike, Jorah Mormont fought with such distinction that Robert Baratheon himself knighted him on the battlefield. Knighted by a king, that is not nothing. Ser Jorah Mormont returned from the Greyjoy Rebellion with a reputation and a knighthood, and in short order, he acquired something else, a wife. Lynessa Hightower, this is where the story turns. Lynessa Hightower, the woman who ruined a lord. The Hightowers of Oldtown are one of the oldest and wealthiest families in all of Westeros. They sit in their great lighthouse tower above the city of Oldtown, masters of commerce, patrons of the citadel, lords of ancient prestige. Their daughters are raised in a world of plenty, silks, music, feasts, courtly elegance. Bear Island is not that. Jorah met Lynessa Hightower at a tournament. a world apart from the cold pines and grey sea of his birth. He won the tournament. He named her Queen of Love and Beauty, and in the romantic fog of that moment, he asked for her hand. The Hightowers, for their own reasons, agreed. It was, from the first, a mismatch of devastating proportions. Lyness Hightower came to Bear Island expecting the life she had always known. What she found was a timbered hall, a cold sea, bears in the forest, and a lord whose idea of entertainment was going over the accounts of the catch. She was miserable, and Jorah, desperately, foolishly in love, could not bear her misery. He spent money Bear Island did not have. He hired chefs from the south. He bought her expensive gowns. He threw feasts, commissioned musicians, poured gold into creating for her the comfortable life she had always expected. Gold that did not exist. Gold that had to be borrowed. Gold that had to be found. And when it could not be found honestly, found by other means. The crime and the flight slavery is illegal throughout the Seven Kingdoms. This was one of the more sincere reforms of Targaryen rule. Slaves cannot be held in Westeros, and the slave trade is outlawed. The penalty for selling men into bondage is death. Jorah Mormont sold poachers into slavery. He caught men poaching on his lands, a crime. Yes, one punishable by death or the wall by northern custom, and rather than executing them or sending them to the Watch, he sold them to slave traders operating out of Essos. The money was good. The crime was catastrophic. Eddard Stark discovered what he had done, and Ned Stark, Eddard of the Unbending Honor, the man who wielded ice himself when justice demanded it, came north to Bear Island to execute Jorah Mormont for his crime. Jorah ran. He fled Bear Island with Lyness, fled across the narrow sea to Essos, fled from the justice of the man he had called his liege lord. He took with him nothing but his skill with a blade, his knighthood, and the woman for whom he had destroyed everything. The story did not improve from there. In Essos, Jorah attempted to rebuild. He tried the free cities, he tried mercenary work, he tried trading. None of it was enough. Lyness grew colder and more distant. The life she had fled Bear Island for was not to be found in a free city on a knight-errant's wages either. Eventually, she left him. Lyness Hightower became the mistress, and then the kept woman, of a wealthy merchant in Lys. She went from one comfortable cage to another. Jorah was left with nothing, no home, no wife, no title, no honor, a knight without a lord without a castle, a man without a name worth speaking in the land of his birth. He became a spy. The spy and Daenerys Targaryen in Essos. Varys the spider's web of little birds reached across the narrow sea. The Master of Whisperers was always looking for informants, and a disgraced Westerosi lord, desperate for a royal pardon, was exactly the kind of informant Varys could use. The mission: attach yourself to Daenerys Targaryen, the exiled Targaryen princess, wife to Khal Drogo of the Dothraki. Report on her activities. Report if she becomes a threat. Report everything. In exchange, a pardon. The ability to go home. Jorah took the deal. And then, slowly, over months of riding with the Dothraki, something happened to him. He began to believe, not in the Targaryen cause necessarily, not in the abstract restoration of a dynasty. He began to believe in Daenerys herself, in this silver-haired girl who'd been sold like chattel to a great horse lord, who had found in herself something unexpected and iron, who faced every humiliation and horror of her situation and bent without breaking and rose without losing herself. Jorah Mormont fell in love again. He stopped reporting. He betrayed his arrangement with Varys when Varys ordered him to stand aside and allow assassins to reach Daenerys, and Jorah chose her life over his pardon. The pardon he had sold his honor for, he threw away for a woman who did not love him in return. History is full of men like Jorah Mormont, men who are brave enough for everything except the acceptance that the love they feel is not returned. His sword arm was magnificent. His devotion was total. His judgment, where Daenerys was concerned, was near blind. He served her faithfully across the slavers' cities of Essos. He advised her. He protected her. He killed for her. He argued against her more reckless impulses and obeyed when she overruled him. He was, in every functional sense, her most loyal soldier. And when she eventually discovered his past spying, she exiled him. He came back. He was exiled again. He came back again. Because Jorah Mormont was in the end a Mormont, and Mormont's stand. The grayscale, and the final proof Jorah contracted grayscale, the terrible, slowly creeping disease that turns living flesh to stone, consuming a person from the outside in, until the mind is gone and only a monstrous creature remains. Most men who contract grayscale beyond childhood die of it. Those who do not wish to wait can take their own lives, or sail to Valyria and spend their remaining days among the ruins and the smoke. Jorah Mormont sailed to find a cure. He found it, or rather a young healer named Samwell Tarly found it and applied it to him in the Citadel, a procedure so painful that most physicians refused to attempt it. Jorah survived. He went back to Daenerys. In the end, for all his failures, for all the self-destruction, for all the love that warped his judgment, Jorah Mormont died as a Mormont, standing between the woman he served and the enemies that would destroy her. Standing until he could stand no more. Standing, because that was all he knew how to do. Here we stand. Part 6, Maege Mormont, the she-bear, the woman who ruled Bear Island. When Jorah fled Bear Island to escape Ned Stark's justice, the lordship passed not to some male cousin, but to Maege Mormont, his sister. In the south, in the world of Andal traditions and faith of the Seven, a woman ruling a lordship is unusual. Succession laws can exclude female heirs in favor of distant male relatives. The great houses of the Reach, the Stormlands, the Westerlands, they have complicated rules about who may inherit and who may not. Rules that frequently disadvantage women. The North does not operate this way. The North follows the old ways in many things. First Men custom holds that a lord's children inherit before cousins or more distant kin, and daughters inherit before those outside the bloodline. A lord's heir is a lord's heir regardless of gender, unless circumstances are exceptional. And on Bear Island, where the women had always fought and always worked alongside the men, a female lord was perhaps even more natural than in most of the North. Maege Mormont was Lady of Bear Island, and she was magnificent. She was a stout woman, deliberately, unapologetically stout, in the way of a person who has spent her life eating what she needed to do, what she needed to do. She had grey hair and a lined face, and she carried a morning star, a spiked iron ball on a chain, a weapon that requires genuine strength and aggression to wield effectively. She was not a graceful fighter. She was not a dancer's fighter. She was a bear. She had daughters. Several. Their fathers are not recorded. Maege Mormont apparently found the traditional institution of marriage less interesting than the institution of choosing her own path. In this too, she was consistent with Bear Island's culture, where necessity had always mattered more than convention. Maege Mormont and Robb Stark, when Robb Stark raised the northern banners and marched south to rescue his father and answer the murder of Eddard Stark with northern steel. Every lord of the north was called to make a choice. Maege Mormont did not hesitate. She answered. She rode to Winterfell with her daughters beside her, armed, armored, and entirely prepared to fight. In a war where most lords sent their sons to lead their levies, Maege Mormont came herself. Robb Stark was 17 years old. He was learning command in real time, under circumstances that would have broken older and more experienced men. He needed people around him he could trust completely. People whose loyalty was not calculated, not transactional, not subject to revision when the winds changed. Maege Mormont was exactly that person. She was among the lords who proclaimed Robb king in the north at the Great Council in the Twins. Aftermath, among those voices that rose in the River-run hall and said, loudly and without hesitation, that they would have no king but the king in the north. She served in Robb's councils. She carried messages. She fought. Robb eventually sent her and Lord Galbart Glover on a mission of crucial importance, to sail up the neck and make contact with the Crannogmen of House Reed, to seek the support of Howland Reed and secure the water road north. This was not a small errand. The Crannogs control movement through the neck. And Howland Reed is perhaps the most politically significant minor lord in the entire North, bound to the Starks by the oldest ties of loyalty. Maege Mormont sailed with her daughters, and then the Red Wedding happened. Robb Stark died at the Twins, murdered at Walder Frey's table under the laws of guest right, betrayed by men he had trusted. The Northern cause collapsed. The Boltons seized Winterfell. The Great War that had consumed so much life and blood ended in treachery and darkness. Maege Mormont was somewhere in the neck when it happened. What became of her, to whether she survived, whether she remains hidden in the marshes with the reeds, whether she's even alive, the books do not tell us. She simply vanishes from the record, as the North's great cause vanished. But she had daughters, and one of them was already on Bear Island. The daughters of Maege Mormont. Maege Mormont had 5 daughters: Dacey, Alysanne, Lyra, Jorel, and Lyanna. All of them trained as fighters, as Bear Island custom demanded. All of them bore the Mormont stubbornness as naturally as they bore their mother's name. Dacey Mormont, the eldest, the heir, the one who most closely walked in her mother's armored footsteps, rode with Robb Stark as one of his personal guard. She was at the Red Wedding. Dacey Mormont died at the Red Wedding. Peter Frey, one of the treacherous Frey sons, smashed her across the face with a flagon of wine at the moment the massacre began, then stabbed her when she fell. She died trying to fight back. She died the way a Mormont dies, on her feet fighting. Alysanne Mormont, second daughter, was called the She-Bear by those who knew her, in honor of her mother. She was a fierce fighter who preferred swords and axes to the more refined weapons of southern knights. By the time of the events at the Wall, she had aligned herself with Stannis Baratheon's forces because Stannis was willing to fight the Boltons, and fighting the Boltons was what the North needed. Lyra, Jorel, the middle daughters, are less documented. They were on Bear Island or with their mother in the marshes. Their fates hang in the uncertainty of a narrative not yet complete. And then there was Lyanna, the youngest, the one who became, in a single extraordinary scene in the books, the most memorable member of her house. Part 7, Lyanna Mormont, the girl who shamed the North Bear Island, stands alone when the Red Wedding killed Robb Stark and broke the Northern cause. Bear Island found itself in an impossible position. Maege Mormont was somewhere in the neck, unreachable. Dacey was dead. The Lord of the Island's closest overlords, House Stark, were either murdered, captured, or scattered. The Boltons had seized Winterfell and proclaimed themselves Wardens of the North under Lannister authority. And running Bear Island was a 10-year-old girl, Lyanna Mormont. When Stannis Baratheon came north to try to retake the North from the Boltons and rally the Northern Lords to his cause, he sent ravens to the houses that had not yet declared for Bolton. He needed their men. He needed their castles. He needed their acknowledgement of his claim. Lyanna Mormont wrote back. Her letter is one of the most celebrated documents in A Dance with Dragons, a response so blunt, so self-possessed, so utterly and completely Mormont, that it has the quality of someone twice her age and 3 times her experience. Bear Island knows no king but the king in the North, whose name is Stark. That is the entire letter. That is the whole message. Stannis Baratheon, King Warrior, the Lord of Light's chosen champion, received that response from a child, and there was nothing he could say to it that would not look foolish. She was not rude. She was not defiant in the theatrical way of someone trying to make a point. She simply stated fact as she understood it, as her house had always understood it. Bear Island serves the Starks. There is no king. Therefore, there is nothing to discuss. Jon Snow, reading the letter, was asked by Stannis what he thought should be done about it. Jon Snow suggested that perhaps they should leave her alone. The North remembers Lyanna Mormont's significance. Lyanna Mormont, in her brief appearance in the books, does something that a dozen adult lords and experienced political players failed to do. She tells the truth. At a moment when the North is fractured, when lords who once proclaimed Robb King are bending the knee to Boltons and Lannisters, when pragmatism has replaced principle at nearly every northern table. A 10-year-old girl on a cold island writes 4 words and refuses to move. Bear Island knows no king but the king in the north, whose name is Stark. This is not strategy. This is not calculation. This is not the move of someone trying to survive until a better position presents itself. This is what Mormonts do. This is the island that cannot retreat into the sea. This is the woman whose mother rode to war herself. This is the house whose words are 2 syllables of absolute commitment. Here we stand, and even if the world burns, even if the king we named is dead, even if we are 1 island and 38 fighting men, even if the girl running the castle is 10 years old, we stand where we have always stood. There is something almost unbearable about the beauty of it. Part 8, Longclaw, the sword of House Mormont. No history of House Mormont is complete without speaking of the sword. Longclaw is a bastard sword, a 1.5-hand blade, longer than a 1-handed sword, but shorter than a true 2-hander, designed to be wielded either way depending on the situation. It is Valyrian steel. Valyrian steel is, in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, as close to magical as a blade can be without crossing entirely into legend. Forged in the Dragonlord civilization of old Valyria using techniques that died with that civilization, Valyrian steel blades are impossibly sharp and light for their size, never requiring sharpening, holding an edge that makes ordinary steel look dull by comparison. And Valyrian steel kills whites. This last quality matters more now than it ever has in living memory. The dead are rising. The White Walkers are real. And there are perhaps 200 Valyrian steel swords in the entire world, most of them heirlooms of great noble houses, treasured across generations, brought out only for the most significant battles. Longclaw was carried by the lords of Bear Island since before any living memory. How long the Mormonts had it, no one says for certain. Long enough that it was simply assumed to be theirs. Long enough that when Jeor Mormont joined the Night's Watch and brought nothing of value from his old life, Longclaw was the exception, because even a man who renounces his lordship and his lands does not lightly leave behind a Valyrian steel blade. The pommel is a silver bear's head, fitting for the House of the Bear. When Jeor gave it to Jon Snow, after Jon saved his life from the Whited Castle Black, the pommel was changed from a bear to a wolf. A small detail, but a telling one. The sword was being remade for its new bearer. The bear was stepping back and letting the wolf carry what the bear could no longer carry. Longclaw is now Jon Snow's sword. Whether it will ever return to Bear Island, whether the Mormonts will ever reclaim what they gave away in gratitude and love, is one of the great open questions of the series. But perhaps it does not matter. A Valyrian steel blade is most valuable in the hands of someone who will use it against the darkness. And Jon Snow is exactly that person. The old bear understood that. He always did. Part 9. The Mormonts in Battle. A house. That fights House Mormont has never been a house of great generals. Not in the way that House Stark or the great southern houses produced commanders who changed the shape of wars. Their numbers were always too few, their island too remote, their resources too limited for Bear Island to field an army that could decide the fate of kingdoms. But their tactical tradition deserves examination, because it reveals something fundamental about how they approach war. The Mormont fighting style, as much as we can reconstruct it, is direct. No clever flanks, no elaborate strategic feints, no patience for the kind of chess match generalship that men like Tywin Lannister practiced. You meet the enemy. You hit them as hard as you can. You hold your ground. This is not stupidity. It is the product of an island culture that fights on ground it cannot abandon. You cannot fall back from Bear Island. There is nowhere to fall back to. The water is behind you, and the water is not your ally. You stand. You hold. You win or you die. This philosophy produced soldiers of remarkable stubbornness. Not inspired, not innovative, stubbornly, unmovably determined. The Siege of Pike, where Jorah earned his spurs, the Greyjoy Rebellion of year 289 AC, 9 years. Before the events of A Game of Thrones, gave House Mormont its most famous recent battlefield moment. Balon Greyjoy rose against Robert Baratheon's reign, proclaimed himself King of the Iron Islands, and launched an assault on the mainland. The Ironborn raided Lannisport and burned the Lannister fleet at anchor. They seized Seaguard. They stormed Casterly Rock's approaches. Robert responded with full force. The decisive engagement came at Pike, the Greyjoy stronghold, a castle built on sea stacks connected by rope bridges, essentially impossible to assault frontally without massive losses. Robert brought his host and his fleet and surrounded the island. The siege ended when part of the castle wall collapsed under sustained assault, creating a breach. Through that breach, men fought in the rubble and the fallen stone, the grinding, ugly, intimate kind of fighting that tests individual soldiers rather than commanders. Jorah Mormont went through that breach. What exactly he did in the fighting at Pike is not detailed in the texts, only the result is recorded. He fought with such valor that Robert Baratheon, the man who personally killed Rhaegar Targaryen and was not known for handing out honors carelessly, knighted him on the field. It was the peak of Jorah Mormont's martial life. Everything after that in Westeros was downhill. Daisy Mormont at the Red Wedding. We have spoken of Daisy's death, but it is worth dwelling on it for a moment longer. Daisy Mormont was Robb Stark's personal guard. She was one of the people closest to him in the war, in the field, in councils, at his side in the dangerous intimacy of military leadership. She had watched him plan. She had watched him grieve. She had watched him grow from a boy into something approaching a king. When Petter Fry attacked her at the wedding feast, it was not a battle. There was no warning, no time to draw properly, no chance to form a defense. The musicians raised crossbows. Rose Bolton's men drew steel. The exits were sealed. Daisy Mormont still tried to fight. That is the record. She was struck with a wine flagon and then stabbed. She did not run. She did not beg. She did what a Mormont does. She stood. Even in the ambush that killed the king in the north and shattered the northern cause, even in a moment designed specifically to prevent resistance, the Mormont girl tried to fight back. If the North remembers, then the North remembers Daisy Mormont. It should. Alysanne Mormont and the campaign against the Boltons. After the Red Wedding, the North fell to the Boltons. Most of the northern houses bent. Some had no choice. Their lords were dead, their heirs hostage, their castles occupied. Others calculated that resistance was suicide and that survival required accommodation. Alysanne Mormont aligned herself with Stannis Baratheon, not because she loved Stannis or believed in his claim or thought him a great king. She aligned with Stannis because Stannis was fighting the Boltons, and fighting the Boltons was what needed doing. This is the pragmatic streak beneath the Mormont stubbornness. They are loyal, but they know who their loyalty is to. It is to the Starks. It is to the North, not to whichever Southern lord happens to show up with an army and a claim. You earn Mormont loyalty. You do not inherit it by default. Alysanne participated in Stannis' operations in the north, including the rescue of the wildlings at Hardhome and the march on Winterfell. She fought in conditions that would have broken most soldiers. Winter marching through snow so deep men disappeared into it. Supply lines cut, the cold killing as efficiently as any sword. She bore it, because she is a Mormont, and Mormonts bear what must be borne. Part 10. Bear Island and the Coming Great War 38. Fighting men. When Stannis wrote to Bear Island and Lyanna Mormont refused him, Stannis' reckoning was this. Bear Island was small. It had perhaps a few hundred people, a few dozen fighting men. It was not worth the political cost of antagonizing a child ruler who might, eventually, be persuaded. He left her alone. In a dance with dragons, when Stannis' men discuss the fighting strength of Bear Island, the number given is 38. 38 fighting men, not 3,800. 38. This is the reality of Bear Island at the end of the War of the Five Kings. Maege is gone. Somewhere in the neck, Daisy is dead. The island's men have been bled out through years of war, through answering Robb Stark's muster, through the attrition of conflict. 38 fighting men, and one 10-year-old girl who will not bend her knee to anyone who is not a Stark. 38 men, and a house whose words mean exactly what they say. This is what makes House Mormont extraordinary, not the numbers, not the wealth, not the strategic position or the castles or the armies. It is the fact that with 38 fighting men and a child running the island, they still send the message: we are here, we remember who we serve, and we will not bend. What can you do with that? You cannot threaten it. You cannot bribe it. You cannot argue it into a different position. You can only stand in front of it and be quietly, powerfully shamed by it. Why the Mormonts matter in the War for the Dawn? George R.R. Martin has built this world with a particular kind of architecture. The visible story, the politics, the battles, the throne games, is the surface. Beneath it, older and darker and more important than any of the scheming of men, is the real crisis, the return of the long night. The White Walkers marching south, the dead rising to serve them. The endless winter gathering beyond the wall. In that war, the war that actually matters, almost nothing that happened in the War of the Five Kings will have been worth anything. Joffrey, Robb, Stannis, Tywin, all their schemes will be dust when the real enemy comes. But the houses that remained loyal, that remembered the old obligations, that kept faith when keeping faith cost them everything, those houses will be the ones who stand against the darkness. House Mormont is exactly that kind of house. They are the kind of house that, when the world needs people to stand in a cold, dark place and refuse to move, will be standing there. They have been practicing it their whole existence. Bears on the island, ironborn from the sea, treachery at feasts, terrible choices and irreversible losses. None of it moved them. When the long night comes again, if it comes again as the Maester's ravens whisper it might, the Mormonts will be there. 38 men, a girl of 10, and a bear that will not stop roaring. House Mormont, they did not build the great cities. They did not field the great armies. They did not sit on thrones or wear crowns or write their names across the history of Westeros in gold and fire. They did something harder. They stayed. On a cold island, in a dark sea, surrounded by bears and raiders, and a world that gave them very little, they stayed faithful to the people they had sworn to serve. Generation after generation. Through Robert's Rebellion, through the Greyjoy Rebellion, through the War of the Five Kings, through betrayal and exile and massacre. When Robb Stark raised his banner, Maege Mormont was the first to ride. When Robb Stark was murdered, Daisy Mormont died trying to fight back. When Stannis Baratheon sent ravens demanding fealty, a 10-year-old girl wrote 4 words and meant every one of them. Bear Island knows no king but the king in the north, whose name is Stark, and when the long night comes, when the dead march south, and the cold devours the world, I believe it will be houses like this one. Not the richest, not the most powerful, not the cleverest, the ones who are still standing. Comment bait. Here is the debate I want to leave you with. Jorah Mormont sold men into slavery. He spied on Daenerys Targaryen for a royal pardon. He made choices that a true Mormont should be ashamed of. Choices his father would never have made. But in the end, he died protecting the person he served. He stood when it counted most.
So tell me in the comments.
Is Jorah Mormont a Mormont in the truest sense, or did he betray everything his house stood for? Did he redeem himself, or was it too little too late? I'll be reading every reply. If you made it this far, you are the reason this channel exists. Subscribe, like, share it with the one person in your life who will actually appreciate a 1-hour deep dive into a minor northern house on an island full of bears. And until next time, the North remembers. Here we stand,